Bethlehem flees because of a famine, comes to the land of Moab, and sets up their shop there. But then the father dies. It would seem rather young. And the two boys who've grown a bit by this point, take wives from that country. But in a cruel twist of fate, both of the boys die as well. That's the beginning of the story of Ruth. Now, we were supposed to do that part at the beginning last week, but we kind of wisely substituted the joy of our children singing the parables out in song and celebrating that with a meal that, frankly, I'm still rather fondly remembering. Except that's not all of it, is it? You see, when the boys die, Naomi, their mother, says to the girls, go home. Go back to the homes of your fathers where you can find new husbands. And this, of course, leads to all kinds of hugging and crying, and Orpah decides to actually go and leave. Not to start a new TV network. This is not Oprah. This is Orpah. She goes home to the father, but Ruth will not leave Naomi. She clings to her. Where you go, I'll go. Where you stay, I'll stay. Your people will be my people. Your God will be my God. Ruth chooses her mother-in-law as her family, even as Naomi insists that she leave. Naomi had nothing to give her. She makes that plain to Ruth. She says that she feels as if even God has deserted her. She says, the hand of the Lord has turned against me. Truthfully, her love of Ruth is seen in the fact that she wants what is best for Ruth. And what is best is to go home. But Ruth wins the argument by refusing to leave Naomi's side. And that brings us to today and the fields of Boaz. And I got to tell you, when you're doing a sermon series of several weeks on a small book, it's really tempting to jump to the end of the story. And the end of the story of Ruth is rather entertaining. But I'm not going to do that. Because it's in the fields of Boaz that we find out something important about Ruth. We find out what Ruth is made of. She's in the field and she's gleaning. She's picking up the scraps after the reapers. And Boaz comes along and he notices her. And we find out here that Ruth is a good example of a Protestant work ethic. Thousands of years before Protestants. Boaz talks to the young men who are working for him, and he says, who is this? And obviously they've noticed her and talked to her as well, and they say, she is the Moabite who came back with Naomi from the country of Moab. She said, please, let me glean and gather from among the sheaves behind the reapers. And so she came, and she has been on her feet from early this morning until now without pausing for a moment. Boaz has heard of the faithfulness of Naomi. Now he's seeing that faithfulness lived out, and he's moved by it. He calls her over. He blesses her in the name of the Lord. He makes sure that she has something to drink. He tells the young men not to mess with her. He feeds her. And then he says, stay in my fields. Stay by my servants and my family. And finally, he tells the men to make sure she gets a few extra handfuls of barley. And those few extra handfuls, they end up being about 30 pounds. And that is a lot of barley. So Ruth takes it all home, tells Naomi what has happened. And Naomi's reaction, she says, in regard to Boaz, blessed be he by the Lord, whose kindness has not forsaken the living or the dead. Like a starving person being given a crust of bread, Naomi finds hope. A lot of bad things can happen in this world. And Christians, like members of most faith traditions, we struggle with it. We struggle with the why. And there are two main routes that these arguments or discussions everything happens for a reason. And the second is God has given us free will, allowed sin into the world, and therefore the world is flawed and tragedy does occur. It's an argument you actually see raging in the Scriptures. In the book of Job, the main character loses everything for apparently no really good reason. And basically, you see, it's kind of true. Because in the beginning of the book, you get this interesting glimpse into the heavenly realm, and Satan, who is actually a member of God's heavenly court here, says to God, hey, you know your servant Job only loves you because you've given him everything. And God says, okay, put him to the test. So Job hasn't done anything special, and yet he loses everything. And then his friends, and we all need friends like these, his friends come along and work very, very hard to convince him that somehow he has done something deserving of punishment. But if you look at Jesus, in Luke 13, he's talking about the tragedy of the Tower of Siloam. This Tower of Siloam was in Jerusalem, and it fell. And it killed people. And he says, do you think that those people who were killed were any more guilty than anyone else in Jerusalem? I tell you no. I don't think everything happens for a reason is a doctrine of Jesus. It is a doctrine of some Christians. I would hope that it's not a doctrine, or it's a doctrine we hope probably that is not best pulled out at funerals. Because it's kind of full of comfort in a time of tragedy. Life happens. Life happens. The world isn't perfect. Tragedy does occur. And we can't really know all the reasons why. I do think it's tied to the fact that God has largely given us the reins. I also think it's because this life is a process. We're growing. We're becoming together. It's a step in a process that will bring us to permanence to God, with God rather. And for reasons God only can comprehend, sadness has to be part of it, even if it's only through sadness that we can come to know joy. We find in this story a broken old woman who for no really good reason has lost everything. Given for no really good reason, an adopted daughter who inspires her by refusing to break. In Ruth, we see the faithfulness of God displayed in a human being. Naomi tries to push her away, but Ruth says, no, I will not leave you. Even as the sweat pours off her body, and she nervously picks at the grain behind the reapers, probably wondering, are these strange men ahead of her going to assault her? Or will these women she does not know turn on her? She just keeps working and working and working because that's how she can love Naomi. That's how she can care for her, even as God, no matter what happens, always loves us. There was a time when humanity took the great gift of God and hung him from a tree. But even then, God would not be pushed away. God did not stop loving, and God still loves. And in that love, there's hope, no matter what occurs. And we will see for Ruth and for Naomi, there will be resurrection. Just as there's always going to be resurrection for you, and for me, and for the world. In this time when there's so much tragedy, when the field of the world is war-torn and filled with injustice, let's remember love can bring it back. And God is love.